all so much for coming out on this miserable night. As Lynn said, I'm David Parker, and I'm here to share with you a project that we've been working on no discharge zones. So I'd like to just run through a few very basic things very, very quickly, finish the talk in a few minutes, and then leave time for some discussion. So let's start with the U.S. Constitution, because a lot of people wonder, why is it that there are federal agencies involved in places like Back Creek and the Severn River? And it goes right back to Article 1 of the Constitution, which is on the legislature, Section 8, which is on the powers of Congress, and Clause 3, which is the regulation of commerce. And so the Founding Fathers decided that Congress should have the power to regulate commerce under three conditions. First, with foreign nations, second, among the states, and third, with Indian tribes. So, of course, in the beginning, waterways were much more important than they are today as means of commerce. And so very quickly, the waters of the United States became subject to federal jurisdiction. So today there are three regulatory agencies that work on navigable waters. The Coast Guard, which handles navigation aids, safety, security of the waters themselves. Secondly, the Army Corps of Engineers, which is primarily concerned with issues associated with shorelines, flooding, and boundaries. And third, the Environmental Protection Agency, which has broad responsibilities for water quality. The key piece of legislation that we're going to be talking about is the Clean Water Act of 1972. Title III of that set a whole series of standards and described enforcement procedures, and Section 312 of that was on marine sanitation devices. The Coast Guard was tasked with creating standards for sanitation devices. A sailboat that I owned, an Endeavor 32, built in December 1975, had no sanitation devices at all. It just straight piped into the creek, and everybody else did too up until that point. It wasn't until January 1976 that these standards went into practice. So the Coast Guard set up three kinds of treatment devices. The simplest is a holding tank, type 3, which can have a Y valve, so it can be pumped out through the deck or pumped out through the hull into the water. How many of you are boaters? Would you stand up, please? Sorry to do that. Okay, my great research associate here, Diane Butler, is going to count you.
All right.
Please, just hold your hands up.
Who isn't? Who isn't? And then I'll count everyone.
Does my kayaking canoe, does that count?
Yeah, sure.
I'm a kayak.
So you're not? Okay, 1, 2, yeah. Okay, and then I'll count.
How many of you in your boats have a holding tank? Ooh, a lot. How many is that? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay.
It's never been used.
Aha, okay.
It's too small to use.
The other two are what are called treat and release systems, using either some kind of chemical, salts, maceration, in some cases heat. A type 1 marine sanitation device leaves water that has no visible solids, and 1,000 bacteria cells per 100 milliliters. The type 2 is a higher standard, primarily aimed at commercial boats over 65 feet, which have 200 bacteria per 100 milliliters, so it's a better treatment system. Section 312 of the Clean Water Act provides for the creation of no discharge zones under 3 circumstances. First, where there is a drinking water intake, where the need to process the water for drinking would be greatly encumbered by bacteria from boats. So this is primarily found in freshwater lakes that are drinking water sources. Secondly, the second condition was sensitive habitat. There are very few of these, but the Florida Keys is one. And third, the availability of pump-out facilities able to pump out holding tanks on boats, sufficient to ensure that this is possible to do without greatly inconveniencing boaters. The first requirement in applying for a designation, this is an application which is done by the state, in our case the state of Maryland, is a certification that it's needed, that there is something wrong with the water, and that a no discharge zone could help to correct. And so we start there, and the most compelling evidence is the B+ rating from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for the lower western shore rivers, which happen to coincide perfectly with those in Anne Arundel County. The Magathie, the Severn, the South, the Weston Road, and parts of the Tabasco. Back in 1976, when the when the marine sanitation devices were set up as standards, there was really no concern about nutrients. When you thought about sewage in those days, you thought about bacteria. And so it made perfectly good sense that the Coast Guard focused on bacteria, and in fact, that system works pretty well. But since 2010, we have had a total maximum daily load limitations, which is called the nutrient diet, of nitrogen and phosphorus. And unfortunately, the treatment systems that are available today on board boats of any sort really don't address nutrients at all. So despite huge efforts, the exemplary efforts in all of Maryland, Anne Arundel County is going to fall very, very far short of meeting its permit limits for nutrients in this present permit cycle. There are a few no discharge zones already. There are 53 of them to the north of us. They started in Region 1 of EPA, which is headquartered in Boston. And so today, central Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut are completely no discharge zones.
For how long? For how long have they been no discharge?
That process took 22 years, began in 1992. And so it finished, actually it just finished last year. New York, the Region 2, headquartered in New York, kicked in, and so now all of Long Island Sound, all of the Hudson River, all of Lake Champlain, all of the Mohawk Canal, the Erie Canal, the U.S. portion of Lake Ontario, and the New York portion of Lake Erie are all no discharge zones. New Jersey, all the way down from Sandy Hook, all the way down to Barnegat Bay. So Region 3, which is headquartered in Philadelphia, which includes Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, is now just entering this cycle. The first no discharge zone was created in 2002 at the instigation of the owners of Harrington Harbor Marinas, Stuart Cheney and his son Hamilton. This is a 3,500 acre area of Herring Bay from Rosehaven up to Deal. In that map at the end there, it's the orange area down at the bottom of the county, just above the Calvert County line, 3,500 acres. The Lynn Haven River in the Chesapeake Bay just west of Virginia Beach was the next in 2007, and then Fishing Bay and the town of Deltaville also in 2007. And on the Maryland coastal bays, Ocean City, just inside of Ocean City, up to the Delaware line, has been a no discharge zone since 2002. And the Chester River, which is the model that we have followed, has an application pending since last year. The Back Creek Conservancy was,
Any reason
yes.
why things drag out, if it would seem that it's kind of time to do this, why does it take like so long? You said application pending on it. Or is it just bureaucracy?
It has taken quite a long time. The present administration put all of these applications through a very big review, particularly because the Puget Sound had come in as a huge application. So just a couple of weeks ago, the entire Puget Sound has now been declared a no discharge zone. So we're expecting that the Chester River will be forthcoming soon.
Thank you.
The Back Creek Conservancy was organized in March of 2015. But even before that, in November 2014, the Annapolis Environmental Commission passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a no discharge zone in Annapolis. The local boating industry was very concerned about this because they were afraid that people would want to avoid Annapolis because of constraints on the boating that this would involve. And so it was understood pretty quickly that what was needed was really something that was a county-wide initiative. And so the Steve Schu's Maritime Industry Advisory Board came through with a resolution calling for a county-wide no discharge zone in December 2016. And the Severn River Commission came through in January 2017. We began working on this in the summer of 2016. We had an intern who did a feasibility study, and from late last year until the present, we've been working on a draft application for the no discharge zone. So we started with a clean piece of paper and started looking for marinas, with public marinas with commercial no discharge, commercial pump out facilities. There is, many of you have received already a map, and on the back of it is a complete list of all the marinas in the county. So there are 55 marinas. We mapped them all and found that they fell on 13 separate water bodies. 4 of them are on the Patapsco River, not including Curtis Creek, which is basically an industrial creek. It's not a place for much recreational boating. There are 4 rivers involved, the Magathy, Severn, South, and Weston Road. And then there are 5 creeks that open up, 4 creeks in a bay that open up directly onto the Chesapeake Bay. So as you will see from the map, what we have tried to do is concentrate on the areas where the boats actually live, and where waste discharges from boats most likely accumulate, we have stayed away from the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay. This is an area where boats that have treat and release systems that want to discharge legally can go into the Chesapeake Bay to do that, where the dilution factor is so huge that its impact is much less. We've tried to figure out what kind of environmental impact a no discharge zone might have. At the present time, there's about 1 million pounds a year of nitrogen that flow into Chesapeake Bay from Anne Arundel County. That's a lot of nitrogen. We think that we played with all kinds of scenarios for months and thought that maybe a realistic guesstimate might be that we could capture about 3,600 pounds of nitrogen from a well-functioning no-discharge zone. So that's 0.36%, a third of a percent of the total. You say, well, why bother? You know, who cares? But today, the Anne Arundel County is spending $6,140 per pound to capture nitrogen through best management practices that are installed on the land. This is a countywide average. We today, the Back Creek Conservancy, is doing a best management practice at the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association in the Back Creek watershed. We're looking at something close to $20,000 a pound for nitrogen. And this is obviously totally unacceptable. We're never going to get there. Nobody is going to pay $1 trillion to capture nitrogen in Anne Arundel County. And so we think that this is a very cost-effective way of doing a little bit at a minimum cost that will capture nitrogen that would be worth approximately $22 million a year. If there were to be a no discharge zone, it will be processed, the city, Mayor Buckley, and the county Executive Steve Shu are both very supportive of this. They plan to push this through the respective councils, the city council. The chairman of the Environmental Matters Committee is here. Rob, would you raise your hand so everybody sees you? Thank you, Rob. And the county council will also wants to have the final say and pass a resolution in favor of that. We expect that that will happen very, very soon, and then it will go up the food chain to the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of the Environment. Secretary Mark Belton will probably be the person who actually sends the application into EPA in Philadelphia. The person who runs the Clean Marina and Clean Boating program, Donna Morrow, was unfortunately not able to be here with me tonight, but she's been a tremendous person of creating the Clean Marina program, putting out 82 pump out facilities in Maryland in recent years, and creating the Clean Boating Pledge, which we want to support very much. So when the no discharge zone happens, when the designation is put through, NOAA will be tasked with revising the charts so that the no discharge zone boundaries will be marked on those charts. We are working with an app called Active Captain, which is basically a notated chart program that you see on your laptop or your on your nav station. So we want to be able to highlight all the marinas, where they are, and what their hours are, what the draft at the marina is, and so on. Both the Annapolis Harbor Master and the Weston Road Riverkeeper have pump-out boats. They're working very efficiently now. We expect that the Visitors Bureau, they've already lined up looking for support, willing to publicize this when it happens, and the boat shows will also. The general manager of the boat shows, I asked him, well, what do people think about no discharge zones when they come down south, in October for the Columbus Day weekend boat shows? He said, well, most of them we assume that we are already a no discharge zone. So the boat shows in both the spring and the fall are good opportunities to publicize this. And finally, I don't think anybody wants this, but the Coast Guard and the Natural Resource Police can issue citations for discharging. But the presence of poop police is not something that we really want to look forward to or spend a lot of time preparing to enforce it in that way. One of the impediments to a no discharge zone is that there's no credit for it right now. The model of the Chesapeake Bay program basically says what's already in the water, you don't get any credit for it. And you don't get any credit for not putting something in the water that doesn't come from the land. And so a expert panel has just last month published a study, a 2-year-long study, that has recommended that a best management practice be created that will give local jurisdictions credit for nutrient reductions through a no discharge zone, through pump outs in a no discharge zone. Finally, yeah.
Pet waste, that's on the land. We've got E. coli from the dog starts out in my yard and ends up in the tree.
Well, that's a serious issue, but it's a completely different one. I mean, that has to be taken care of.
You can't legislate the dog.
It has to be taken care of.
If you were saying waste from a boat is not land originated, we've got pet waste bacteria that is land originated that ends up in the water, which should get the authorities concerned. You're saying different animal.
Different animal, not less important. Every bit helps. So, yes,
Well,
Joe.
can I make an observation kind of related to that?
Sure.
I mean, I think one of the value, so you talk about the value, you equated the cost of a BMP for removing nitrogen, you looked at that, and you kind of, that's on land, and you kind of put a value on, approximate what we're getting. But what I think is true is these creeks are impaired. Once we make them no discharge zones, there's a value beyond that equivalency.
Yeah.
We are labeling these now, and then you can go to other authorities and you can say, look, you're getting pet waste runoff into these creeks that are no discharge zones. In other words, that's not part of the no discharge zone EPA regulations, but you can still use that, when you go and deal with other organizations or whatever, the city or whoever may regulate that. I don't know. I'm just saying that the value is bigger than the whatever. I don't remember the number, but it's bigger than the number they put up there.
So the harbor master, the Annapolis harbor master, who's a very strong supporter of this, she's constantly reminding me, perception guides behavior. And so what we're trying to do is to create a kind of a cultural norm to up the ante. This is how you behave when you come to Annapolis, when you come to Anne Arundel County as a boater. You use the pump out facilities at the 55 marinas that presently are able to accommodate you. Yeah.
It's like backpacking in the Grand Canyon. You brought it in, you take it out.
Yeah,
Good.
right. Perspective, simple concept.
So I don't want this to be an educational event. I want this to be an advocacy event. If you are a supporter of the no discharge zone, please contact your city or county council member and let them know that this is important to you as a voter and that you would like to see this pushed through. If you're an opponent, please do nothing. Thank you all very much.
Next question, David.
David, are you
Yeah.
taking questions?
Sure, yeah.
I've been a member of this organization for many years. And we've done things to our house like rain barrels, rain gardens. We have forest between our house and the waters and keep the runoff. We're doing all kinds of things. I have a boat. It was built in the 1960s, late 60s. When I bought the boat in 92, it had a lead percent in it. I bought it in May. And I thought, well, let's try a holding tank. The biggest holding tank I could put in that boat was 6 gallons. And it's a sailboat. It's got a 6-foot draft. I look at your list in the back here. Over half of these, and if you go to another list, over half of these marinas, I can't get into. I got a boat that does 6 knots at most under power. So I had to pull the 6-gallon holding tank out, and I put my lead percent back in, figuring that's the best I can do. So I'm killing the bacteria. Obviously, I can't do anything about the weather. So I'm sort of stuck. I don't know what to do. I mean, I can't rip the boat apart and put in a legitimate holding tank. So I put my 6-gallon holding tank back in and just dump the raw stuff in when I get overflow.
At least if he has an electrocyan, he can treat it somewhat.
The bacteria.
If he has a 6-gallon holding tank, it's completely useless because you can't sail for half a day with a 6-gallon holding tank.
So I'm sort of stuck, and I don't know how to get around this
Are
problem.
you near a pump house?
You're,
No, I live.
He's way up the Silver River, the closest marina is Smith's, and he can't get into
Can't get
Smith's,
into
he's too
Smith's.
deep.
And then what do I do when I go to the Eastern Shore? If I only have my 6-gallon holding tank, where there's even fewer pump out stations and the water's even thinner.
yeah, in the real world, there are people such as you who have a serious problem. And unfortunately, it tends to impact the people who care the most. Which is,
I do care, but I
yeah,
don't know what to
exactly.
do. I mean,
I'm not sure that there really is a solution, except to take the sort of long-term view. I mean, think about how boating has evolved. Back in 1975, we were all using Loran. How's your Loran working for you guys now? Who's using Loran still?
But you could replace a Loran with a similar size GPS. You can't replace an electrocyan with a similar size holding tank and have it work.
Right,
Or you can't take
A
it.
GPS doesn't take up any more space in the boat than a Loran.
right.
So I really don't, I'm all in favor, which everybody's trying to do, and my septic tank at home is in good shape, I maintain it, I do everything I can do, but I just don't know how to follow this.
Yeah.
I'm screwed.
I mean, unless we can convince you not to ask for a no discharge zone, he can't, it's a law he can't follow.
Well, I think that the issue is really that I don't think that you're likely to be facing jail time anytime soon
we don't like
because of
breaking
your
the law.
But
situation.
I don't like breaking the law either, and I don't know.
The electricity.
If the boat had been built. with
This would make the electrocyan
The
illegal.
electricity.
No, the
It is
electricity.
now. It would be illegal.
No. It would,
No,
the
no,
electricity,
it's a no discharge zone.
excuse
It would
me,
be illegal.
this is very important. There's nothing that would make the electrocyan illegal.
But I can't.
It just needs to be discharged into the main stem of the bay.
But he has no room for a holding tank.
But, so what you're saying is that I can't use the boat in the creeks because I can't use the electricity. So I can only stay in the Chesapeake Bay.
You won't be able to bring a boat home.
You can't discharge your holding tank.
There is no holding
Let's move on.
If you have holding tank.
Yeah, Terry, you
can't
have a
discharge
question?
it.
Yeah, I mean, you got a real anomaly situation.
That's not an anomaly.
That's not an anomaly, it's an older road.
There are a lot of older boats around that you just can't get a legitimate size holding tank.
You had a question?
No, it's not a budget, it's a statement,
Okay, good.
okay? And older boat, I got one myself. What would I do? Composting toilet. Yeah, shower, you can't do anything about that. You can't do anything about your walk, using any from sinks. However, just your toilet, the composting toilet, really works.
Yes, indeed.
But it doesn't.
That's all I wanted to say.
No, there are a number of people,
However, holding tanks don't take the discharge from the sinks and the, anything but the toilets. Only the
I'm
great
just
water.
talking about just
So
the
that's,
toilet.
nothing else counts.
Gray water.
Just the
Yeah,
gray water.
Gray water is
I'm
normally
just talking
discharged.
about,
That is not effective.
Well, if we looked at,
composting toilets are amazing.
yes,
we
indeed.
looked at that, and it just doesn't.
I got, well,
Any other questions or comments?
Well,
Rob.
but on that, do you know how we're not the first place in the country to consider this, so I'm sure this has come up elsewhere. Do you know how they've handled some of these old boats?
They can't
That
get
can't
grandfathered
get-
in.
Yes, there's a very tried and true method, which is forbearance, tolerance, giving time. It's not a matter of trying to penalize people, but simply to accommodate reality that there are boats, and there are a lot of watermen's boats that have trouble meeting retrofit opportunities. So the answer is, let it slide.
The answer is break the law. You're gonna pass a law and
Yes.
tell us how to break it?
If you have a holding tank and you go out to the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay, is it legal to discharge that, or is that illegal under current situation?
It's completely legal now
Discharge of
and in the future.
And then-
Or a type
It's
two.
not.
Not true, David.
Type
You
1?
cannot discharge a holding tank into the main stem of the Chesapeake unless it's been treated.
A type 1 or type 2, the kind of
Yeah.
system that you're talking about, is completely legal to discharge electrosand.
But he was saying either holding tank or electric tank. Can you keep your holding tank?
You
with
can't
a
have,
tank?
I can barely fit the letters.
So you can't have both.
I mean,
Yeah.
they can't, isn't there a way to?
I got a whole bunch of questions, so please bear with me.
Sure.
You mentioned that you expected 3,600 pounds of nitrogen to be remediated. How did you come up with that number?
It's in the application. The application will be posted on our website. We modeled different estimates. There's about 15 different estimates that go into that, governing how many people are on board, how often the boat gets used, how often the head gets used, and so on. How many days in the year, and so on. So 3,600 pounds seemed like kind of middle.
And that's just on boats that have a type 1 or 2 holding tank, or MSD.
That's all kinds of boats.
Well, it's already illegal for type 3s to discharge, so how are you calculating that? Why are you calculating that in the estimate?
Because we have the feeling that there are a number of boaters with holding tanks presently who do not avail themselves.
But that's not gonna change.
They're breaking the law anyway.
That's true. That's true. And lots of people say, well, what's the point of this? Because it's already illegal to discharge from a holding tank. But the answer is, what we're trying to change is people's perception and to reinforce the notion that this is not acceptable behavior to do this. We've had, every year, but the last 3 years, the Back Creek Conservancy has identified sewage discharges, which we cannot nail down as to exactly where they came from. But we have this strong suspicion that they were from a boat at a dock. And, you know, there's not much you can do about it. And that will continue on because it's very private behavior, very personal, and nobody wants to live in a police state where, you know, your boating is impaired in that way. What's your next question?
The next one is, have you done any water quality studies in the various water bodies, like the different creeks in Annapolis or the different rivers to get a baseline of nutrients and things like that? And will you do follow-on water quality tests?
The answer is yes to both of those questions, but we've of course not been able to directly measure the impact of a no discharge zone, but we have been in communication with a great many of the existing no discharge zones, including that in Herring Bay. The people who look after the Herring Bay no discharge zone think that it was instrumental in massive qualitative improvements in water clarity and habitat revitalization. There are now terrapins there that were never there before the beginning of this century. So they believe that it's had a huge impact.
So that goes to the question, which is efficacy. What does it actually accomplish? The reason I asked you about the how long the regulations had been in place in upper New England was what's been the result? Is there any measurable improvement that can be attributed to this?
Well, it's complicated because a lot of the jurisdictions in New England had combined stormwater sanitation systems, like the city of Baltimore does. And so they had to go through a huge process, major capital investments, to separate the stormwater and the sewage systems, which is the systems that we have now separate. And so when that happened, the no discharge zone, the most definitive study was by the University of Rhode Island, says that the Narragansett Bay, they think that the no discharge zone played a noticeable role in cleaning up Narragansett Bay.
Okay, a noticeable role.
Right.
See, because I'm also looking at those figures, those 3,600 and other things that you're looking at, wondering, and I totally endorse and support your overall goal here, which is cleaner, better water. But I wonder how much difference it makes. I wonder, for example, most sailors, I believe, most boaters, I think, are respectful of the situation in creeks and confined waters and go out into more open waters. In which case, I find it hard to believe that their pee and poop makes much difference. Yes? No? Maybe?
Yes, no, maybe. We don't have the resources, financially or manpower, to be able to answer that question definitively. I don't think anybody can. But I can say that in 95 acres of water, which is Back Creek, there are 1,709 boats in the water and 3,200 boats on the land. And every one of those boats in the water has some impact, however minute, on the quality of the creek. The point is, boaters are in general the most caring, most involved, most directly associated with the Chesapeake Bay. If boating goes away, if there's no longer any recreational boating to speak of, then the primary eyeballs that are supporting what is going on won't be there anymore. And I don't like to be a doom and gloom kind of guy, but we've had a huge red and mahogany tide, both at the same time, that's gone from the Magathie to the Weston Road rivers. It includes the Severn, the South, Whitehall Bay, And it's just,
Do you attribute that to boats?
no, but I attribute it to a decline in environmental quality. And so that I think that it's important that everybody does everything that they possibly can, realistically. So
With all due respect, the weak part of this argument is the inability to demonstrate the difference.
Well, and I'd like to comment on that because the
That
city
it
of
would make
Annapolis,
the difference.
City of Annapolis
That it
had
would
the
make.
harbor masters from Newport and Chatham, Massachusetts, Newport, Rhode Island, and Chatham, Massachusetts, come down and talk about the water quality difference when they had enacted no discharge zones. It was really impressive because they also talked about how commercial industry, how they reacted, and it was amazing how they thought there was going to be major pushback from commercial, but as soon as they could see how that benefited them, they were on board immediately. And the water quality, again, it's not as scientifically provable, but it just seemed to happen at the same time other things they were doing. And so, it's really hard definitively to say it was a no discharge zone, it made things better. But you can't say it didn't have an impact. And so, I thought clearly with conversations I had from those harbor masters that the pros were much stronger than the cons, many fields over.
Yes,
Did you have something, Robert?
thank you, Diane. I appreciate your comment. Very much.
Can you say something too about how those harbor masters, I thought it was really interesting when they talked about the fact that people who are boaters are very environmentally conscious. And I know from my sailing that I just expect it. If I'm going up to Newport and I'm going to any of these parts of New England, I just expect that this is in place and everybody's on the same playing field. And they seemed kind of shocked
That
to
we
find
weren't.
out that
Right.
Annapolis wasn't that way. And people that come here seem shocked to find out we don't have this basic standard in place.
I think
And
that's
we're
right.
sailing.
And we just sailed in Narragansett Bay last summer, and every place we went, right, John, there was a no discharge zone. Actually, when we were looking at the chart plotter, it would say, no, it has it marked as a no discharge zone. We would never think of opening up our Y valve, in an area where, it's Block Island, Narragansett,
You have to wonder
Jamestown.
how it compares to runoff. And,
Oh, I know, it's probably small.
all the other,
It's a piece of the puzzle, but the impact and the cost are so minimal.
Yeah, Rob.
So,
Please, here.
Take the mic. Take the mic.
Take-
so I've heard the concern before about, is this going to be effective? And what's the impact going to be? And we've had the city, the Maritime Advisory Board asking for, well, you need to do the science to show that before you ask people to do this. But I think we have, and our creeks are they're very unique ecosystem, right? We have creeks that are of varying depths. Some of them go between being a mud flat to being 6 feet deep. In between, they have various levels of flushing ability in terms of the water, the creeks coming into these. So it's really hard to quantify the impact that this is going to have on each of our individual creeks. They're all different. So to ask us to really quantify that in that regard is very cumbersome and very burdensome. And I don't think it's needed because we know the basic science, right? We know the basic science that nutrients lead to dead zones in the bay. Anything we can do to reduce those nutrients is something that we know is going to be a benefit. It's going to be worthwhile doing. That's why we did a push to reduce fertilizer use in yards. Right, that's why we put rain barrels on our roofs. Those are small things that we know will add up and make a difference. But we know that basic science. That's the basic science my 7-year-old understands, right? Poop in the water is bad. We know it's going to lead to nutrients. So it's like basic math, right? We know 2 + 2 = 4. We know enough to know that this is going to help. And I don't think it's worth the amount of time and effort and money to do the study to prove that 100% this is exactly what it's going to do for us. And it's also immeasurable in terms of the public perception that this provides. If we can have all the boaters that come into Annapolis and the county and see this is a no discharge zone, we'll be increasing the amount of use of our waterways. You know, the mayor, Gavin Buckley, likes to talk about how he has his kids swim in the creek all the time. You know, we'll be having more and more people talk about that.
But if you're not changing the discharge and they swim in the creek, how are they any better off because there's a sign saying it's a no discharge zone?
Well, they will. This will be impacting the amount of discharge in the creek.
Especially
We know it
for
will.
first
It's going to reduce the waste that gets dumped in the creek. Therefore, it's going to make a difference. You may think it's going to be minimal, and it may be minimal, but in these creeks that are only a few feet deep, that could be a huge impact. Huge impact. That's why we have different beaches that have different bacteria level counts in the county. That's because, not because of the sewer discharge, it's because the individual flushing capability of these individual beaches. All these little factors add up, and it's really hard to quantify. And I know, I get that people have concerns about historic vessels and how they can't be retrofitted. I get it. But, you know, David's emphasized repeatedly that this is not, the focus of this is not enforcement, especially not enforcement on your average boater. I would like to see us work with the large boats, right? Like, and especially in Annapolis, we have these large tour boats. I want to make sure they can get retrofitted. Those are the ones I'm focused on. Nobody's talking about going after the individual boater. And I get that you want to be in compliance with the law, but I don't think we should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater in this regard. I don't think that's sufficient reason to say, well, let's not do anything. I think we all need to do everything we can to make a difference. And this is something that's the most cost-effective thing, one of the most cost-effective things we can do to tell the entire community we care about this.
I'm not suggesting you don't do anything. I'm only suggesting that you consider either grandfathering boats that don't have holding tanks built in, that they can't put a legitimate tank in.
Yes, that's a very good suggestion. Unfortunately, the EPA will reject an application that includes that kind of grandfathering. So the other point I wanted to make, because we've been sent back again and again to talk with the 53 no discharge zones that exist already just to the north of us. I have yet to find anyone who has any responsibility for managing it who thinks it was less than a tremendous success. The executive director of the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association commented that from their point of view, the most important impact was that millennials were starting to come back to boating, an industry that is dying demographically, just like golf. Millennials want clean water, and they're more attractive, they're more ready to consider undertaking boating in a no-discharge zone than otherwise.
Whether the water's clean or not.
Exactly. Perception is a driver of behavior, but they want clean water. We all want clean water.
No, I think it's clean.
Any other comments?
Are there any enforcement mechanisms in the plan?
There is built into this a $1,000 fine.
But how do they enforce? How do they?
Well, there are a lot of different ways in which people are experimenting. This is a real-life laboratory. In the Lynnhaven River, the boat boys who do the pump out drop a green dye tablet down into the holding tank, so that if the holding tank is leaking, it will show up.
Is that proposed here?
No.
So what is proposed here other than the fine?
A lot of promotion and education and outreach.
But that's not, I'm talking enforcement.
I think doesn't the harbor master keep it running?
The harbor master has enforcement authority. The natural resources police have citation ability, and the Coast Guard. But all of these agencies are really hurting for funds. And so
Are you aware of them writing any tickets in Maryland?
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. The harbor master has written 7 in the last year.
7?
7 citations, yes.
Just make a point, what you're talking about is the water. Is the
Is that
water?
a lot or a little?
It's minuscule. Isn't it?
I don't know, I thought, I was quite impressed. Yeah, you had a comment.
Yeah, so I think we're missing a key point too. When you ask is the water no cleaner, that's in terms of nitrogen. But bacteria in these discharges can have a tremendous impact. One discharge.
I thought that type 1 and 2.
Can I just finish?
Got rid of the bacteria.
One discharge, if someone's just discharging, you know, without any equipment, and we know people hang on the side and so forth. That can have a tremendous impact on a small creek, just like a couple of dogs. So you have to keep the nitrogen versus the bacteria separate, and whether you think it's cleaner or not cleaner.
What really is nitrogen? Can you see it, or is it visible in a glass of water, or what?
Visible in a glass of water?
No, it's usually in the form of nitrites or nitrates. These are compounds that interact, that are part of the food of algae, particularly, and dinoflagellates. So they contribute directly to the kind of algae blooms, harmful algae blooms, that we have had underway in the last couple of
Well,
weeks.
can you look at a glass and see whether there's nitrogen in it?
You're more likely to see the algae. You're more likely to see green or brown or blue-green.
So there's nothing in the real nitrogen.
Once it's in the water.
Once it's in, I mean, like you're saying, it's rid of the bacteria, which is a good thing, but I can't get rid of the nitrogen.
Right.
And does electric sand, is it inspected to make sure it's getting rid of bacteria?
If you're out on out there fishing, and you've been fishing for a while, drinking maybe a couple beers and stuff, and you get off the back of the boat, is that $1,000 fine?
No one's gonna fine you for that, ever.
No,
You know,
Why
I
not?
think,
Why not?
well, because there's, first of all, we don't.
Why not? Can you put that in writing?
Well, because I don't think there's going to be the enforcement ability. It's more about education and perception. So I have a friend who works for Jeannot who said they are no longer building tanks without holding tanks because they see the market is
I'm not
driving
talking
us
about that.
towards.
I asked a question.
Right. Right, and the question is.
Can you write that in, that that's actually an allowable discharge?
So lawyers love that.
Zero bacteria.
Lawyers love that.
Zero
I'm a lawyer,
bacteria.
but I wouldn't do that. because it would
There's
just
no
be-
nitrogen that's gonna affect the planet.
That's like
We're
writing an
paying.
exemption for public urination. I mean, people are gonna go behind the building to do it anyway.
Right.
I mean, but you just don't do it in front of the police, right? I mean,
What you're saying,
write it in the law.
okay, so you're saying that that's still allowed
Speak for
as long as you
yourself.
don't do it in front of the.
Well, I mean, I think this addresses
But I'm
major
just-
tour
at some
boats that
point,
might
wait a
have
minute, you're looking at
hundreds
a
of people
very
per day
small-
that come into the creek.
Excuse me, but
I'm sorry, I didn't.
so what I'm saying is, you are trying to address the nitrogen, which is like less than 0.1%. You can never measure that. It's impossible to measure 0.1%.
It's 1 million pounds a year.
No, you can't. You just said that that number was estimated.
No, not the
From the
million
discharge-
pounds.
From the discharge from the systems that like the friends or these people up here have, you cannot measure that impact. It's impossible. It's less than 0.1%.
Okay, I'm a retired doctor. I wrote a paper on testing for nitrogen in the Baltimore Harbor. You can test down to parts per million. You can test for it. You can.
No,
You're saying there's no
I'm talking about the
test.
total. If I have 100 parts and I now ask you to measure 0.1, you can't measure that. Statistically, it's impossible. I come from a clinical background, and like, so I understand statistics a little bit. So it's impossible to measure 0.1% difference, or 0.5, or
I can say
1%.
one thing, it's kind of like Joe the Messenger, that's what I feel like. He has an idea, and we're trying to change the mindset of people. And,
Right.
This group already doesn't discharge. I can
Right,
guarantee it.
right, that's it. It's like, so we have tour boats that come into Annapolis that have hundreds of passengers per day that come into Back Creek and dump. And
Well,
I
then
go
look at-
paddleboarding, and when I
can
see them
you
discharge or
identify the
smell
size of the
things.
vessel then?
No, I'm just saying, there are enforcement options for the major violators, and it's not any one of us in the room, and we just want to get at that.
But can you say that a vessel over 100 feet has to be responsible? Or something like that. I mean, it's just, It doesn't make sense.
That's what don't matter, that's what's going to happen, because it simply isn't worth the money to enforce at the individual voter level. But when you're talking about one vote with hundreds of passengers, that's worth the effort of enforcing. So that's what's most likely to get enforced. There are never enough funds to go around.
But it should be.
Well, there's an important point though. So the city of Annapolis, we're the only jurisdiction in Maryland who has a harbor master. Otherwise, enforcement will be done by DNR. And if I can speak from the city's perspective, the harbor master's perspective, she doesn't have, it's her most of the year. Except the summer, she has a lot of people helping out with doing the processing and office work. She is not going to be doing enforcement on these small boats like that. Unless somebody's complaining about somebody discharging repeatedly, like she does with the liveaboards who are not in compliance with the law, she'll go after them. She doesn't have enough time. We don't have enough money to be enforcing that on the small boats. You don't have to worry about that, but I think we can't make that distinction when we submit our application to the EPA. It has to be essentially an all or nothing for the no discharge zone, is my understanding.
Can you say something about the other no discharge zones in terms of enforcement? Isn't there a lot of experience to?
There's a lot of options, yes.
Yeah, the main enforcement, the main enforcement mechanism is the marinas. The most successful marinas now have a clause that slip holders who discharge are in violation of their slip contract and are gone. The Arundel harbors had to do this once, several years ago, and it's never happened again. And so we think that obviously marinas, particularly the clean marinas, particularly the marinas that have the pump out facilities, are the first line of, I won't say enforcement, but implementation. And I think that there's a lot of methods that we can use that will enhance voters' awareness of their own responsibilities to handle their waste properly. I'm going to hand it over to you.
I think we've accomplished our purpose here with starting the discussion on this anyway. And I would like to tell a story from my community, which is all the way up at the top of the river in Ben Oaks. We are tested by Operation Clearwater for bacteria every week. 1 week, our bacteria spiked. It shouldn't be like that because we're so far up the river.
Severn River?
So I let
Which
the community
river?
know that our bacteria spiked, and I suggested that it might have been somebody discharging at the pier. It never happened again all summer, and I still believe that that's what the problem was, and the boater just either didn't know they weren't supposed to do that, or they didn't realize that we were testing, or something. But public awareness does help. So I think this is kind of what we're trying to do here, is just start the discussion so that we can get this application underway and decide what pros and cons are, what we need to worry about, what we don't need to worry about, that kind of thing. So thank you all for coming. We've got a little bit of time to talk among each other.